Chapter 11. Lynching Party. Mother's chorus recessed for the Christmas holidays. Anne arrived home from college December 19, and Al Lynch came to visit Ernestine the following day. Ernestine had spent the preceding month instructing us on how to behave in his presence. No one was to start eating at meal times until everyone was served. Frank was not to forget to help Mother into her chair. Martha was to refrain from discussing the cost of various items on the menu. Mother was to be sure that Bob and Jane didn't go around the house with their rompers unhinged. All of the boys were to give Al top priority in their bathroom. All I'm asking, Ern kept telling us, is that for 4 days you try to make believe we're reasonably civilized. It seemed like a fair enough request. Our first impression of Al had not been favorable, but first impressions often are unreliable, and if Ernestine had her heart set on impressing him, we thought the least we could do was cooperate. We're trying to make sure everything goes smoothly, Mother promised her. Now don't you worry, dear. Frank and Bill moved out of their bedroom and doubled up with Fred and Dan. Anne and Martha helped Ernestine change the sets on one of the beds of sheets and clean the room and stow away radio parts, arrowheads, hockey sticks, some things in glass jars containing formaldehyde, and other miscellaneous. The girls also cleaned the parlor, since Ern planned a buffet supper so that her Montclair friends could meet Al. We knew Al was driving down from college, and we expected he'd arrive in an old Model T, probably with writing on the body. We were sitting in the dining room, just finishing lunch, when a new 1925 Packard Roadster pulled into the driveway. There was no writing on it, except for the initials A.L. and 6-inch letters on the doors. Behind the wheel, wearing the most luxurious raccoon coat we had ever seen, was Al. "That coat," Martha whistled, "cost $600 if it cost a nickel, and goodness knows what a Packard costs." "Don't you ask him what it cost either," Ernestine warned. "You can count on me to act civilized," Frank told Ernestine. "If we can land him, none of us will ever have to work." "Get away from the windows," begged Ernestine, who herself was peeking from behind a curtain. "Golly, look at that Catsy car." "Everybody sit down," Mother ordered. "Where are your manners?" We came back to the table and heard Tom go to answer the doorbell. A minute later, he opened the door from the front hall into the dining room and stuck his head in. "It's for you, Princess," he announced, "and from the coat he's wearing, it's a good thing nobody ain't out hunting today in the royal woods." "That will do, Tom," Mother said sternly. "Hink, hink, hink," Tom wheezed. "I've seen him before at Nantucket." Ernestine glared at him and put her forefinger to her lips, but tried to laugh gaily. "When he came in," said Tom, "I asked him for 6 cans of peas. He jumped and said, 'Yes, sir. Anything else?' Hink, hink, hink." "It's so amusing to have Tom around, don't you think?" Ernestine said loudly. "Will you be good enough to excuse me for a minute, Mother dear? I'll just run out and see who it is." "Bring him right in," Mother told her. "Perhaps he'd like some desserts." Ernestine walked to the dining room door. "Why, it's Al!" she exclaimed. "How delightful!" She closed the door behind her, and we heard running in the hall. "I didn't know he came from a wealthy family," Anne whispered. "He wrote Ern about it," Martha explained. "His father sold his produce business and bought some stocks." Al and Ern appeared in the dining room with their arms around each other's waists. Al had hung up his raccoon coat and his pork pie hat, and there was a ring around his patent leather hair, where the headband had rested. "We'll leave your suitcases and ukulele in the hall," Ern told them. "I'll see that our man takes them up to the guest room." She glanced apprehensively toward the butler pantry, but Tom was fortunately in the kitchen, out of earshot. Just as at Nantucket, Al seemed a little too collegiate. Only now he also seemed a little too opulent. His clothes were new, extreme, and expensive. His +8 knickers hung almost to his shoes, and a jeweled tie pin sparkled above the neck of his blue and white checkered sweater. Al was smiling and very handsome. He considered himself well in command of the situation. "Greetings and salutations, everybody," he said. Just one great big happy family, huh? We said greetings, and we guessed he was right. All the boys stood up. Ernestine had instructed them carefully on that. I'd like you to meet my mother, Ernestine said formally. Mother, may I present Mr. Lynch? How do you do, Mr. Lynch, said Mother. We've all been looking forward to your visit. Me's to please you, Al chuckled, wringing her hand. Me's to please you. My friends call me Al. That's nice, Mother said, favoring him with what was meant to be a cordial smile. But she looked as if she wondered what his enemies called him, and, as if providing they were searching for a word, she might be able to supply it. This is Anne, Ernestine said. She's just home from Michigan. Press the flesh, said Al, pressing it. He didn't exactly go into a clog dance when he put out his hand, but you had the feeling he might. Where have you been all my life, baby? We thought Anne was going to tell him she had been hiding from him, but instead she swallowed and asked how things were going at Saigon Agricultural and Technical. Fine and dandy, Al boomed. Couldn't be better. I guess you read about how he massacred the football team from Wallace teachers. Is that, Anne guessed, the traditional Turkey Day classic? It sure is, Al agreed. You read about it, huh? It was splashed all over the front pages of the papers out in Michigan, Anne said innocently. I wish I had thought to save you the clippings. Ernestine introduced him to the rest of us, and we all pressed the flesh. He pulled a chair up backwards to the table and sat with his legs straddling the back. Did you pipe the chair yet? He asked Ern, pointing nonchalantly, hitchhiker fashion, with his thumb toward the window. Why, no, said Ernestine. Where is it? She went to the window. Gosh, is that yours? Why, isn't that a Packard? A little something the old man gave me for Christmas. Cost more than 2,000 beans. Does that answer your question? Anne asked Martha. Isn't that grand? Ernestine exclaimed. But there seemed to be some doubt in her voice. Al and Montclair, with the family, didn't seem quite as attractive as he had been when they were alone in Nantucket. While he was eating the tapioca Mother served him, Al told us about how he had scored 2 touchdowns against Wallace teachers, about how the old man was building a little 27-room place that would cost 75,000 beans on the Niagara River, about how the Tows had stolen a small structure from a farmer's backyard and put it on the front porch of the Tri-Elf house, Elfa, and just before the guests arrived for the big annual homecoming swing-out. We listened, even supplying the necessary polite laughter, but we knew now that if there had ever been a doubt, he was not the man for Ernestine. Al and Ern decided to go riding in the Packard after lunch. Al was buttoned up snugly in his fur coat, and Ern not so snugly in her wool one. It was below freezing, and Ern was a little worried about whether she'd be warm enough in the open car. It's all right, baby, Al assured her as they said goodbye to us in the hall. If you get cold, I'll give you part of my coat. The sleeves! And he threw his arms around her to demonstrate, and then turned her loose, roared, slapped his knee, and actually nudged Mother. I think, Ern, said Mother, wincing and looking as if she'd like to wrap Al's ukulele around his ears, that you better run upstairs and get a blanket. Ern went and got one, and they were off to the tune of a horn that played the first bars of Jingle Bells. You can see for yourself she's made a terrible mistake, Martha told Mother indignantly. You're going to have to tell her so. Oh, I don't think it's fair to judge the boy on such a short acquaintance, said Mother. We're trailing by 1 point, Frank mimicked, and we're on the 35-yard line. 35-yard stripe, Martha corrected him. Stripe, Frank agreed. I call a signal for a drop kick in the center. Pivot man, said Martha, and the pivot man looked back like he thought I was crazy. The stands were going wild. You stop that, said Mother. He's Ernestine's friend, and he's a guest, and he ought to be enough for all of us. Oh, he's certainly enough for me, Martha replied. I'll bet 2,000 beans on that. Suppose he should become our brother, Fred said. How would you like that, Dan? A good question, Martha agreed. Now go up and wash your mouth out with soap. We thought Anne, as the oldest, should help us make Mother see the light. But Anne merely grinned, knowingly at Mother, who tried to avoid her glance. We're not going to discuss the matter any more, Mother said. I want you boys to take a suitcase upstairs, and I don't want anybody to do anything to hurt Ernestine's feelings. Frank and Bill each took a sticker-spangled suitcase, and Fred followed them with the ukulele. If Dad were here, Bill said as he deposited the bags at the foot of his bed, he'd run that sheik out of the house and all the way over the state line. When he pulled that stuff about keeping her warm with his sleeves, Frank agreed, that's when Daddy would have swung at him. Mother does not understand what things like that can lead to the way Dad does. The boys decided as the men of the house it was up to them to get rid of Al. Since it was futile to work on Ernestine, the best approach was to do a job on Al. All the boys took baths that afternoon, and toward the end the hot water gave out. Frank got a screwdriver and took the bolt off the boys' bathroom door. Bill opened the bathroom window. In spite of their coats and the blanket, Ern and Al were blue when they returned home about a half hour before the supper guests were to arrive. Both hurried upstairs to bathe and dress. The boys were in Fred and Dan's room when they heard Al walking around as he unpacked and undressed. Finally, they heard him enter the bathroom, experiment with the door to see why it wouldn't lock, and slam down the window. The water started to run into the tub. Just wait about 3 minutes, Frank chuckled. Can't you see him now? Shivering, leaning over and running his finger under the faucet, waiting for the water to get hot. A chilled, unhappy baritone started to emerge from the boys' bathroom. Something about how undergraduates at Saigon were willing to give their all to the institution, and about how other seats of learning would find the lines riddled and their ends outflanked. Mr. Lynch apparently was the one who subscribed to the theory that if you couldn't lock it, the next best thing was to make such a racket that everybody knew it was occupied. The water in the tub finally stopped running. The baritone became more chilled and unhappy, was choked off entirely in a shuddering gasp, and then was breathlessly resumed. He's underwater, said Frank. Go ahead, Bill. Bill walked down the hall to the bathroom and went in. Al, sitting miserably in about an inch of water, grabbed for a washcloth when he heard the door open, and spread it over himself as best as he could. Brr, shivered Al. What have you got the room so cold for? Good Lord, hissed Al. I thought maybe you were one of the girls. For Pete's sake, close the door. Oh, don't worry about that, said Bill, closing it. Nobody thinks anything about these things in a large family. They don't, Al said dubiously. Nobody will pay any attention to you if you walk in, Bill said. They won't even notice you're in the tub. You mean they may come in? Bill shrugged his shoulders. What have you got it so cold in here for? Is that part of the training rules? I haven't got it gone cold on purpose. You can bet your sweet life on that, Al yelped. The window was open, and there wasn't a drop of hot water. I believe I'd leave the door open, Bill suggested, at least until the room warms up. Just leave the door closed. I don't come from a large family. Suit yourself, then. I'll ask Mother to heat some water on the stove and bring it up. Never mind, said Al, who wasn't sure whether Bill meant he or Mother would deliver the water. I won't be in here that long. Bill helped himself to a glass of water and departed, forgetting to close the door. Close the door! Al hollered after him. How many times do I have to tell you? Okay, said Bill, returning. Of course, if you like it cold in there. He slammed the door. The older boy sent Fred and Dan together to the bathroom to wash their hands. Neither of them paid any attention to Al, who sat muttering in the tub, trying to just finish his bath and get out. Then it was Frank's turn. Frank had put on one of Martha's dresses, silk stockings, high-heeled shoes, and a cloche hat. If he knows it's me, Frank said, getting cold feet, he may get out there and give me a licking. He hasn't been here long enough to tell any of us apart, Bill assured him. And if we hear you holler, we'll all come running. We can handle him. Just to be safe, Frank insisted. Get the hockey sticks. Frank entered the bathroom. As he heard the door open, Al made another precautionary grab for the washcloth. Yipes! He screamed when he saw the female garb. He tried to submerge all of himself under the surface of the water, but the 1-inch level in the tub offered slight protection. Oh, hello there, big boy, said Frank, waving effeminately. Did you have a nice ride? I'll only be a jiffy. He hurried to the sink and got a glass of water, drank it, and started out. Hey, wait a minute, Al growled. I know you. You think you're pretty smart, don't you? He made a grab, but Frank got out of by the tub and into the hall, and Al didn't follow him. Ernestine knew there not being any hot water, however, because she had taken a bath herself. She was furious, but her guests started arriving and had no chance to take the boys to task. Ernestine answered the door and showed her friends into the parlor. There were about 20 of them. We knew them all and we liked them. We pulled back the rugs and started the phonograph. Al was a little late coming downstairs. It may have been that he was hunched over a radiator, or it may have been that his wardrobe took a good while to adjust, or that he had to change his hair oil. Ernestine's girlfriends kept telling her they were dying to meet Al, and her boyfriend said they wanted to meet the out-of-town sheik who had cut them out. None of them had failed to notice the Packard parked out in front, and they were impressed. Al finally made his entrance. All the other boys had on suits, but Al apparently preferred sweaters and +8s. He had his ukulele with him, and his life of the party smile. He walked over and turned off the phonograph. Everybody stopped dancing, and he had the center of the stage. "Greetings and salutations, guys and gals," he said without waiting to be introduced. And this time he actually did do a little clog step, ending up on one knee, like Al Jolson. "A little number," said Ernestine's Al, entitled, "I used to shower my sweetie with presents, but I ain't gonna rain no more." And he threw back his head and started to strum the uke and sing, "Do, fo-dee-doo-dee-o." There was no doubt he could play the ukulele all right, but his baritone was much better than in the icy bathtub. But you just couldn't start out a party that way, even in the jazz age. Maybe after midnight, after everybody had got to know him better, it might have gone over. Ern's guest stood there woodenly, looking first at her and then at Mother, who was sitting near the fireplace with some knitting. No matter what Mother may have felt, she showed no disapproval. Ernestine tried to help her boy. She started to Charleston alongside of him and shouted, "Come on, everybody." She even licked first her right thumb and then her left, in a series of windmill gyrations known as pickin' cherries. But it still didn't go over, and the worst of it was that everybody except Al realized what Ern was doing and why she was doing it. They were polling for her. Some of her girlfriends started to Charleston alongside of her, and some of the boys began to sing along with Al. "A little number," said Al, entitled, "When Bathing Girls Take Up Aviation, I Want to Be There at the Takeoff." He laughed and strummed. You have to admit he was handsome. Do-wacker, do-wacker, do. Ernestine was flushed and out of breath. She knew she couldn't stand another number, no matter how little. "First, Al," she begged, "please get up off your knees and let me introduce you." "I already introduced myself, baby," Al protested. He got up nevertheless. "This is Mr. Lynch," Ern said, beginning to make the rounds. "He's visiting us for a few days, and we're having a peachy time." "Me's to pleat you," grinned Al. He pressed the flesh. Ernestine relieved him of his ukulele and put it on the back of the piano where she hoped he wouldn't find it. Al drifted from group to group, listening to conversations about New York band leaders, Princeton and Dartmouth, new musical comedies, and happenings in Montclair. At first he tried to hold his own in the small talk, but no one seemed interested in hearing about the annual classic involving Wallace teachers. Even before supper was served, Al decided he had enough of the party. "Listen," he said, getting Ern into a corner. "Get me out of here. Let's go for a ride or something." "You know I can't leave now. What's the matter with your friends, anyhow? Why don't they wake up?" "Nothing's the matter with them," Ernestine said haughtily. "It's you. You're acting like a fish out of water." "I am, Well, even a fish wouldn't dare go in the water around this house. In the first place, he'd freeze to death." "I'm sorry about the hot water, but it's no excuse for you to act like what you've been doing. And in second place, a lot of wise guys would run him crazy parading around his goldfish bowl." "What?" said Ernestine, putting his hands belligerently on her hips. "What do you mean by that crack? I suppose you don't know your brothers kept parading in and out of the bathroom." "How would I know about that? And why didn't you just lock the door?" "And one of your brothers," said Al, ignoring the question, "dressed up like a girl." "No," moaned Ernestine. "Oh, no." Then she started to giggle. "That must have been Frank or Bill. They're wise guys, all right. Just wait till I get my hands on them." "It must have been kind of funny at that," Ernestine laughed, putting her hand on his arm. "Poor Al, what did you do?" "It may seem like a joke to you," said Al, tilting up his nose, "but I found it typical of everything around here, including your friends." "And how have you found everything around here?" Ernestine demanded. "In bad taste, extremely bad taste." Considering the source, Ernestine thought that was one of the nicest compliments she had ever heard. She took off the Tau 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 fraternity pin and handed it to him, and Al went up to get his bags. While he was upstairs, she took his ukulele from behind the piano and put it with his raccoon coat. Then she went to the darkened dining room and closed the door. Watched through a curtain as he got into his car and drove off to the tune of Jingle Bells. There wasn't much satisfaction, she thought, in the knowledge that time heals all wounds. If she could just be sure that time, wounded, all heals. After Al left, the party was a big success. One of Ern's friends from Dartmouth monopolized most of her evening. Everyone seemed to understand about Al. No one asked where he had disappeared to.